Welcome to Created Healthy. I'm Dawn Combs. It's a common idea that God gave us everything we need in nature, but do we believe it enough to walk that out in truth? Often the very same people who say this go looking for answers on how to use food and medicine from man-made sources. Everything man creates comes with a user's manual. Why would God be any different? I challenge you to join me in seeking revelation about our body, mind, soul, and spirit health by digging into His written word and in practicing pure science in the visible world of His creation. Because every house has to have a foundation, it was laid strongly on my heart to start this podcast with a daily series. I am using the book, The Bible in 52 Weeks, which you can buy for men or for women. I invite you to read along with me. Happy Sunday. It's another seventh day on my podcast, and on Sundays I record as a video as well as pulling the audio off for those of you who are listening on a podcast. But if you want to pop over to my YouTube channel, you'll see any of the visuals that I use as I'm holding it up for the camera. So one of the things that stuck out for me this week was thinking about the Israelites fleeing Egypt. Pretty much, they had warning. They knew that they were gathering gold and silver and precious metals from their neighbors, but they were really kind of, how much could you prepare in an evening and believing that you might get up and run the next day. They were so prepared, but also caught unawares. And there are a lot of things that you can't really pack in the ancient world. One of the things that gets talked about a lot, comes up again and again as the Passover becomes a major feast, and that is the unleavened bread. And I wanted to talk about that from a design. We talk a lot about sourdough right now. It's a big craze. We're seeing people doing more bread baking at home, and it's done with a natural leavening, the way that you would have seen in the ancient world. They did not have yeast in a package that was made to raise your bread and then die and not be self-perpetuating like we have now. And that yeast is actually problematic, and it's definitely something worth exploring, as Jesus refers to yeast in the Bible as being a problem. Leavening, you have to be careful about the leavening. Sin can go through the body like leavening does go through bread. So we are meant to be intimately connected to bread. It's a really important thing. If you do a word search throughout the Bible on bread, you're going to come up with a lot of references. So I think it's important, where we're first talking about this, to kind of pull over to the side and really think through this in real terms. So I brought along some visuals. One of them is actually my bread bowl, and this is an antique that has been shared with me down through my family. I think my great grandmother had this bowl in her kitchen. This is her leavening bowl, her bread bowl. So what would be used to mix up the dough and allow it to be doing its first rise. It would have gone into a bread box, something that I really want my husband to build for me, and to do all of its rising. But this would have been where we would have prepared it. And when we hear about the Israelites fleeing Egypt, we're told that they carried their bread bowls with them, and the dough that had been created the night before was in there, but they hadn't had time to add the leavening. And the leavening would have been much like this. In my research, I'm told that the leavening is, in the ancient times, would have been something that would have been left over from the last batch, some dough left over from the last batch that would have been soaked in water and allowed to ferment and become a thick, sludgy liquid, so that it became more acidic. And this is my sourdough starter. It lives on my counter all the time. And I'm going to open that up so you can see it is not liquid. It is more of a dough, a doughy consistency kind of all the time. And if we think practically about maintaining a sourdough, this is kind of the thing that everybody has to learn for themselves, is how you maintain it and what your habits will be. Whether you're a daily baker, whether you are maybe a monthly baker, and this dictates whether we're going to keep this sourdough starter in the refrigerator or whether we're going to keep it on the counter all of the time so that we dip in and we maintain it. If you are a daily baker, and if we think again all the way back to the Israelites, they didn't have refrigeration. So they weren't sticking this into the refrigerator and popping it out once a month and making bread. They were maintaining a sourdough starter so that they were getting food on the regular. And the sourdough starter would have to be, when it's on your counter, it has to be fed. It's a living organism. So if it's not fed, it becomes sick and it overpopulates with bacteria that is unhealthy for the body. It becomes moldy. It goes off and we lose our sourdough starter. So the Israelites would be needing to keep their sourdough starter, their leavening. They would be needing to replenish it constantly. And this requires more flour and it requires water. So not only every day are you maintaining a starter with some of your flour supply, but you're also having to have access to fresh water day in, day out, just to keep this fed and in good shape. And then we pull from this and add it to our dough being in here in the bread bowls, and allowing that mixture, then this would spread throughout all of the dough that we've created and turn it into a leavened bread. So unleavened bread is your flour and water that's mixed in here. Your starter gets added to that to make it leavened. And this has to be maintained, and then you have to have product to make your bread. In a practical sense, if I'm running on the road and I don't know where I'm going to be, my stores of flour are going to be really precious. And also, I don't know when I'm going to be. We've already seen several times where the Israelites aren't near water and they're not carrying water because that's heavy. They're having to be concerned with livestock and getting fed, and God starts to drop manna. So we don't necessarily have to worry about baking bread all the time. So this becomes not a practical packing item. This becomes something that we talk today about sourdough starters, that you can pass these down in families and they can live for very long stretches. But I do start to wonder about this idea. God institutes Passover and says, first of all, you're going to celebrate this first one with unleavened bread. Now, there's a practical reason for that. This first Passover, they literally are escaping. Passover is meaningful from a standpoint of God has passed over all of the Israelite homes and spared the children. And now we are running away from Egypt. So we can only take so much. We take our bread bowls with the last batch of bread that we made, but hauling our leavening isn't practical because we aren't going to be having access to steady amounts of flour and water on the road to keep this going, or much less having established ovens to bake this. It gets much more on the survival realm. We leave this behind. So from a practical standpoint, we've got the unleavened bread that we eat that first few days of running. And then God institutes that we're going to celebrate Passover every year at the same time. And the unleavened bread for 7 days is to commemorate that fleeing and that being oppressed people that were being rescued. And that's really beautiful. But I also want to look at the health ramifications here. So let's talk about what we're doing when we are souring or creating our own leavening. We are, there's a lot of talk about phytic acid, and though that being on our grain seeds. And I definitely want to go into, maybe next week when I do a video like this, I want to go into what the design of the seed means and why we're doing that. But one of the pieces of, or the components on the outside of the seed coat that we're concerned with is phytic acid. And we talk a lot about it as being this negative, this bad thing today, because phytic acid reduces our ability to absorb vitamins and minerals and protein. And so there's a concern that people are eating bread every day that isn't being prepared properly, isn't being prepared. It's not just about the leavening. The leavening is just to allow the bread to rise, but people aren't fermenting their grain, which is happening in a sourdough. When they go to the store and grab a bag of bread, they're getting bread that has not been long fermented. It has not been used with a natural leavening. They're getting all of that phytic acid in that bread. Day in, day out, all day long, people are being assaulted then with phytic acid. And because we know that it doesn't allow you to absorb your minerals, and it binds up protein, we have identified it as one of the reasons why we have degenerative disease right now, because people are eating grains unprepared all the time. It's why we're getting back into sourdough as a trend, as people are trying to be more healthful with the grains that they're eating. But interestingly enough, phytic acid, and that's PHYTIC. Phytic acid is actually an antioxidant. Antioxidant should be a keyword that you should hear as healthy. Antioxidants prevent the damage from oxidation of food items in our body. Oxidation that gets at our cells creates damage. Antioxidants are life-giving, they are health promoting, they are cellular protectants, longevity things. And phytic acid is actually an antioxidant, and in some cases it can be cancer preventative. And we can see that phytic acid has benefit because obviously everything that is on the seed coat of the grain was put there for a reason. There is nothing, if I could get over to what I am trying to get out every time I talk to you in one of these videos, is there's nothing in nature that's a mistake. God didn't make mistakes. He didn't make things difficult for a reason. When we prepare our grains now, when we're all trying to do more sourdough, it isn't because phytic acid was put onto the seed and God thought that he was going to get us unless we prepared it properly and it's a poison. There's a purpose for it. There's something good for us in that. So if I think about a yearly practice of making unleavened bread and not using something that breaks down and sours our bread and deactivates that phytic acid, if I see us for a week eating phytic acid, that sounds, from our all or nothing sort of Western mentality, that sounds like, well, for a week we're eating unhealthy bread. No, phytic acid has a purpose. Phytic acid is good for us, and it can actually reverse, kind of be a cleansing and reverse some of the inflammation and degenerative creeping that we've got just from living, and we aren't perfect every day. And so this practice of returning to unleavened bread for a week every year is a beautiful way to say we need to take a break, even from properly, or quote unquote, I'm making air quotes right now for those of you who are listening, taking a break from the perfection of always having our grains prepared properly. We can also equate that, if we aren't practicing Passover every year, or even if we are, we can equate this to occasionally eating out and having bread that is not prepared correctly. Occasionally eating at a friend's house and having bread that is not sourdough. These are little grace notes that get built into our day-to-day living. Because we've identified a negative attribute of grain does not mean that it is bad for us wholesale. Because again, we have to keep remembering God did not make a mistake in putting that compound on the grain. It's not a mistake. It's not deadly. It is something that in large measure, in constant exposure to phytic acid, we get a negative. In overdoing it, we get a negative. And we need to take breaks from it. We need to spend the vast majority of our eating over here in the properly prepared grains category. But when we are eating it not properly prepared, there is a design in place that we get a benefit. So Passover here is a benefit. I also think it's really worth kind of wrapping my mind around. This is something that I'm thinking about further, and maybe after a week of pondering, I'll have more to share in our video next Sunday. But I'm thinking about the sourdough culture itself. The culture we have, there's a reason why we have San Francisco sourdough culture, and then we have different cultures from Italy and all over, because every time we make a sourdough culture, it's actually specific to the place that it was made. It's specific to the bacteria that is in that area, in that soil, in that water. That sourdough or leavening, natural leavening, is specific to that environment. And maybe God did not want them taking the leavening that came from Egypt with them on the road to the promised land. Maybe he wanted to have a break. Remember, bread is important. We now, because we can get it everywhere, it is just something that we don't think about. And honestly, a lot of us have given up bread altogether, but bread is throughout the Bible. It is important. It is the representative of Christ's flesh when he breaks it at the table during the Last Supper. It's important. It isn't just a throwaway food that we should get out of our diet, but when we were making it in biblical times, the leavening mattered. The leavening in Egypt is going to be very different than the leavening in Canaan. And the discussions that we'll have throughout the Bible about yeast or leavening spreading throughout a culture, just like sin, yeast spreading through the Bible or through the body, like sin. This is an intimate understanding of a process that God set in motion for us to have a relationship with. Making our bread every day is really important, and understanding that this leavening is more than just yeast that makes poofy breads and muffins. It is a sense of place. It is a connection to culture. It is a connection to the living culture within our body and how it matches to where we are. And I think there's something in the idea that God disrupts this culture for them and specifically says, you aren't going to carry this with you because you're going to eat unleavened for 7 days to celebrate this first Passover, which is going to get them out of Egypt without a surviving culture. It's going to get them out of Egypt without eating anything that comes from Egypt. And perhaps there was a body reason for that as well as a practical one. I hope you're reading along with me. I pray that God is blessing you today. I pray that he's inspiring you to go and make some bread and enjoy it and think about what that leavening really is, what that culture, that bacterial structure and the benefits for us is. And I pray that he brings you back to keep studying through the Bible with me tomorrow. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with a friend. And I'm always interested in hearing what God is laying on your heart. So drop me a rating or review, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Dawn Combs Really.